I'm Carrie Spalding, the 30-something coach, and I'm so excited to be here today with Rachel Friedman. Rachel is the author of And Then We Grew Up on Creativity, Potential, and the Imperfect Art of Adulthood. And because I work with 30-somethings who are dealing with 30-something panic and figuring out the careers and relationships and lives they love and dealing with the difference between the life they thought they'd grow up into and the life they did grow up into. When I found Rachel's book, I immediately knew that I wanted to talk to her. And as Rachel and I were warming up, I was just telling her, I said, it was hard to get ready to talk to you because I just felt like I highlighted your book within an inch of its life, I think, and just so much that I want to talk to you about, and that I'm excited to share with people who are going through this. So Rachel, thank you for being here and for writing this incredible book.
Thanks for having me.
So for so many people, a big part of 30-something panic is dealing with the dissonance between this self that they kind of expected to be, and or maybe who they know themselves to be from childhood, and the lives they've grown up into. And a lot of 30-somethings embark on career transitions, and they're not sure of how to incorporate that core self into their careers. And in the case of people who identify as artists, like, are doubtful that they can, because there can be a lot of apparent conflicts of values between, security and stability and money and being an artist, and feeling like they're really not living up to their potential. And there can just be so much self-judgment and almost feelings of like self-betrayal. And then of course we live in this world of comparison and like everybody's personal PR and social media, and just so many feelings come into the mix. So when I have recommended your book to clients, they feel so validated and just so supported by the perspectives in your book. And it's really a springboard to greater possibilities for people. And I'm just really excited to talk to you about this. So in your book, I have a quote written down from the beginning. You said, from a very early age, I had a path with a capital P. I knew exactly where I wanted to go in life and the necessary steps to get there. And I was positive I knew how deeply satisfying it would be once I arrived. So that is something that not everybody has, right? Not all of us grow up knowing that, but it's a pretty confident, lovely place to be. And when I help people through 30-something panic, I talk a lot about this idea of the real grown-up, right? We have this idea of like, we formed as kids. It can be so painful and shameful to get to adulthood and realize we're so far from that real grown-up that we thought we would be. And in your book, you grapple with this like one particular iteration of the real grown-up, the real artist or the art monster. Yeah. So can you tell us, like, what is an art monster, and how did this idea of the art monster and dismantling that idea shape your life and shape your professional journey? And maybe even just like introduce us to like, what was your, in a nutshell, journey as a kid and the trajectory you took?
Yeah, so I was a really serious musician as a kid, and my trajectory was essentially, what you said. I thought that I was going to be a professional musician. I went to a very intense arts camp in the summer called Interlochen, which is where all the people interviewed in the book went as well. That's kind of the uniting thread of the book. And it was a place where I think that a lot of young artists clarify that they either want to be an artist or that they don't. And both of those are kind of heavy realizations, for a young person. And for me, I decided I really wanted to be a musician. That was my path. That was where I was headed. And that didn't work out, like so many of our plans don't work out. And I was in college. I was a sophomore when I decided to quit music. I had gone to Boston to study with a violist in the Boston Symphony, and, had a very intense college experience that first year, and I was miserable. And I realized this thing that had always given me so much joy was now the source of this intense misery. And so I did let it go and change paths, but I think I did struggle for a long time with what it meant to let that go, because my identity was so wrapped up in being a musician. And then I ultimately became a writer, and found myself facing kind of a similar moment where I had all of these notions of what it would mean to be a writer, what success would look like, how happy I would be, what I would be doing sort of to earn a living, what prizes I would have won by, X age, like all of this sort of apparatus around being an artist that isn't really about the work of being an artist, but is about kind of the fantasy of the artistic life and
the story, right? The story that you have
ourselves. Yeah. And we're all, whether it's art or something else, right? We all have a story we're telling ourselves about what our lives are going to look like. As you say, and there's this gap, for so many of us between what we thought our lives would look like and what they do look like. And in our 30s is, I think, one of those pivotal decades with our extended adolescence in the US, especially of kind of really facing that gap, between what we wanted and where we are. And so I was facing that, gap with writing. And although I didn't think I would I would stop being a writer, I did think I was kind of in danger of being a miserable writer if I didn't kind of unpack some of the cliches and the like misguided kind of fantasy stories I was telling myself about what it meant to be a writer. And one of
in a way, it's like almost like you had a bit of an edge in detecting that, because it's like, oh, I felt this before.
Yeah.
Like you had an early taste of what it was for your body to actually like reject the path that you were on. And so I imagine when it came up as a writer, it was like, whoa, I know how this goes, and I have to deal with it.
For sure.
I have to actually deal with it.
I was physically ill as a musician. This might be what you're referring to. I was so stressed out as a musician in college that I would get sick before my lessons. I lost a lot of weight, and I was not having the same kind of physical reactions as a writer, but I was feeling disappointed in myself and saying very unkind things to myself about what I had accomplished and what I had not accomplished, and if what other people had accomplished compared to me. And I was feeling the same kind of psychological distress, I would say. It was sort of creeping in there in the same way it had with music. And so you'd ask me about this idea of the art monster, and that is one of those cliches, these stereotypes that I did have to dismantle. And that term comes from a novel by Jenny Offel called Department of Speculation, which I'm obsessed with and love and highly recommend. And it's essentially this idea of the art monster is the idea of the selfish, passionate, tortured, isolated genius. This idea that to be an artist, you have to do art to the exclusion of everything else. And it makes you a bad parent and a bad spouse and a bad friend. And I really kind of, I don't even want to say I'm embarrassed, because what would be the point in that emotion, but I can't believe,
if only that was how emotions worked, right? Like we only have
I can't believe how hooked in I was to that idea. And how much it did affect the way I managed my time, the way I had relationships with other people, and my notions about my own success or failure really hinged on, if I wasn't getting far enough, well, clearly it was because I had not excluded the outside world enough to the degree that I could make great art, right? I was too distracted by everything else going on. And so, this idea of the art monster, it's not really grounded in reality. Much of it is a stereotype, and though there are art monsters, in history, many more men, I would say, than women, probably because women haven't had the same sort of luxury to exclude the world for as long as men have had.
It's a privilege to be an art monster.
Yeah, it's a privilege to be an art monster. And so I guess I had to have sort of two layers of a realization. One, that this was kind of like a made for TV concept, and that even stuff, like mental illness is part of the art monster kind of mythology, right? That this being tortured or
Substance abuse. Yeah.
yeah, substance abuse, personality disorders are what make you a great artist because you see the world differently. And Hannah Gadsby the comedian has this great, one of her specials that's on Netflix now. She talks about how really great art was made despite, not because of these kinds of conditions, right? But we sort of romanticize them, and really, it's not. I even have that view about stuff like antidepressants or things that you would take to dull mental illness. In my mind, I was like, well, if I never needed antidepressants, I'd never take them, because then what would happen to my writing? And I look back on that and just think, oh my God, such a warped point of view. So I had to
Well, and it can be confusing, right? Because I think that so much of art is getting close to realness and authenticity and vulnerability. And so if we have a concept that making it easier in some way to care for ourselves or to like manage our emotions will dull that authenticity, it's tricky. And then when there's the mythology around it of the art monster, it just
romanticizes
that. Yeah,
it feeds that. And I think it's a disservice to when people need help, right? Like obviously to romanticize that. And also, I don't think it's really true for a lot of people that your suffering is the conditions for great art. I don't personally find that to be true. If I am deeply upset about something, I mean, I can write through almost anything, but if I were to hit a layer of, and I have before in moments in my life, hit kind of like just deep sadness, deep grief, whatever it is, that puts things on hold for most people. So there's another way of looking at it. But, so I had to kind of dismantle the truth of that stereotype to begin with. And then I had to sort of ask myself, like, even if it was true, is that really a thing I would want to emulate? And no, like it's not. I want relationships. I want people in my life. I guess you have to kind of have a reckoning of, if I have a kid, is that going to mean I'm never creating great art? Like, well, first of all, who knows? That's an impossible thing to know. But also, I think those kinds of moments too are moments where you have to say you're okay with the quote unquote cost, right? Or the balance of these other parts of your life and your art. And that idea of balance was something I really needed some help with. And people in the book, that I interviewed had such useful points of view on that. And I don't mean balance as in, an even amount of each thing. I think I'm a person who actually balances, finds balance kind of by going deep into one thing and then letting it go and going deep into another thing. It's not so much like an equal amounts of, all the things in my life all the time. I think there are different versions of balance. And I think that's also something I needed to figure out, that sort of the internet articles about balance are not necessarily the way you personally are going to find balance and fulfillment in the different areas of your life.
Yeah. And it's such a personal thing. It's not a prescribed thing. And so you were, as a child, you were extraordinarily talented as a young violist, and you went to a camp where you were sort of swimming in an ocean of very, very talented, the kind of top of the top talent. And you had envisioned this future for yourself as a professional musician. And ultimately you made the decision to quit. And there is so much gold in your book around the idea of, what I call conscious quitting. I think you talk about quitting gracefully, right? And you talk about how our culture of persistence kind of says that you can do anything if you just keep going and working hard enough at it. And that we kind of conflate quitting with failure.
Yeah.
Like always, right? Quitting is always a kind of failure. There's this idea that we can achieve anything with enough hard work. And you say we have a moral obligation to try. You don't say that, but you say that we say that, right? As a culture. And I think I wrote a note. You said we're encouraged to beat back failure with perseverance, and that such perseverance is pathological.
Yeah.
And I just, wham, that hit me over the head, because we do have an almost pathological identity in this country.
Yeah.
There's so much story around perseverance. And here you're talking to a coach, right? Like my work, so much of it is helping people persevere through those, like, you can't be a person going after a goal without obstacles, right? And without resistance and without wanting to stop at certain times. And yet I just was like, yes, 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 to what you were talking about. And this idea of sort of being a prisoner to that pathology of perseverance. How's that for alliteration? So, you talk about how it takes courage to quit something that you have built your whole identity around. So can you talk about how your thinking about quitting and failure have changed over the course of your 30s and over the course of writing this book?
Yeah, well, it's what you said. It's this idea of perseverance no matter what, that I really used to cling to, that idea. And I was fed that a lot as a child, by parents and teachers and our culture. I think most of us are. And I do think, of course, if you have a problem with constantly quitting things, that's an issue, a sort of separate issue to what we're talking about here. Yes, you will face resistance, you will face obstacles when you're pursuing something. But I do sometimes think we assume we're supposed to suffer in that journey, more than is reasonable. I'm trying to think about what exactly I did to free myself of this. I really disentangled these concepts because I just read a lot of, philosophy and research and people talking about, researchers talking about actually if you can healthily quit something that is no longer serving you and redirect your energies and not be attached to that as part of your identity, that you can kind of quit and let go in a reasonable way. They've actually done studies that the people who can do that are healthier people. There's like markers of inflammation and cortisol, they've actually done physiological studies of people. But we do tend to think that we can't quit. And then when we do quit, we do tend to think we're a failure. And that notion of the individual as failure, I talk about this in the book, is a relatively modern notion. Used to be kind of, businesses failed, ideas failed, not that people were failures. That's something that's
as a noun, failures as a human noun, right? A human.
That's some baggage we've really added on, and that I had added on, for my own journey. And I don't think that it does us any favors. I mean, failing, quitting things, moving on, this is a universal human experience, but we often try to rebrand this as a stop on the way to success, or we try to talk ourselves out of feeling bad about this. And, I think if we normalized failing and quitting a little bit more, and the grief around it, if maybe that's too strong a word, but the feelings that you have around that, if we gave them space, that's what I felt like I had to do. I had never given it really any space, this lost identity as a musician, or, whatever other things hadn't worked out, relationships that hadn't worked out. I mean, there are lots of moments of not getting what we want and feeling grief about that. And I think we kind of do those moments a disservice when we turn them into part of our arc of, ultimate success, instead of just leaning in to the fact that those things didn't work out and we're disappointed, and we're not going to wallow in that disappointment, but it's okay to experience it. And I think that we should experience it. We should kind of get out. We wouldn't be so afraid of it, if we could do that a little bit more. And I think we're afraid of failing. I think we're afraid of the rejection that comes with that, or the embarrassment, or whatever else it is. But it's really normal.
Yeah. And those those feelings are like our feelings are energy that have to go somewhere, right? Like they have to get expressed, like get felt, like as a verb,
Yeah.
where they get stuck. And I think, I love what you talked about in the book about, perhaps something really has been lost here.
Yeah.
There was a dream of who you might have been. And this could show, this could be, I thought I was going to be an actor. I thought I was going to be a professional musician, but it could also be like, I thought I was going to be a biological mother, or, I thought I was going to be, partnered by the time I was X age. It's like, we can also have that pathological idea of like repurposing everything as, and again, this can have value, right? To be able to say, like, I love using the mindset, what if I imagined that it was all happening perfectly for me? Like, what if all of this was for me and not to me? That can be really helpful at times. But if it's that like bypassing thing where we're invalidating our really natural feelings of grief, we're skipping that step of feeling the feelings, of being sad that things turned out differently from what we wanted. It can really kind of fracture our sense of like almost integrity with ourselves, right? It's like a part of ourselves saying like to another part of ourselves, like, that's not reasonable or valid or positive enough. And so I'm wondering, like, what advice do you have, like, for you really dealt with this? And I'm sure still, like, part of it is like you can still deal with it. I'm sure you have ways.
Not linear.
Like, what advice do you have for when a big pang of that, like, what if I had, or like, if only I had, or kind of comparison to your own other selves that you didn't turn out into? Like, what advice do you have for people for navigating that?
I think to just go back to the idea of overriding those feelings too, what it also does that's really not great for us is it kind of erodes our intuition, like, and I think that's a lot of what we're missing when we talk about, how do we know when to quit? What does it mean to healthfully quit? What is obstacles versus suffering? I think the cultivating of intuition is a lot of what helps us understand the forks in the road moments, and also how not to hold on too tightly to any one, vision of ourselves.
Oh, so hard.
It's really hard. It's really, really, really hard. Yeah. And I think, so this idea of, you're asking me about like the what if moment when you're having that pang of regret. I think you have to really, you have to feel the loss, like we've talked about. I think you need to give yourself space for that. And I was recently having a moment like this where I was talking about this in the relationship of something completely unrelated. It's a personal situation where I was like, I can't believe I'm still feeling loss and grief over X thing, and the advice that I was given from a friend was, well, you don't want to give this space, so it's taking space. I was saying, like, I feel kind of paralyzed by this feeling of loss and grief, and I feel so silly because this is an old news situation. Like, I've dealt with this, I've moved on. And she's like, well, whether or not it's old news, your body is telling you that it needs the space for this. And she sort of recommended a ritual when I was feeling that way, to like develop a ritual to acknowledge that grief and that feeling, and kind of like honor that feeling. And it was extremely useful. And I really hadn't thought about, despite all this work I've done with this book and my homework and therapy, all this stuff,
I know, right? It's like, shouldn't I be great at this by now?
Exactly. It was a really good reminder that, we face these moments, these what if moments, these moments where we're stuck in feelings, about so many things. So I think that's the first thing, is to give it space. And obviously, but if you're wallowing in this feeling of what if, I should have been X, I should have been Y, and it's like paralyzing you, then I think you really need to ask yourself about what kind of story you're telling yourself, because there's really no what if. There's no way to know that even if you got what you wanted, that you would be happy. There's no way to know that even if you did, you could go left or right, you went left. Okay, instead you went right down the path and, did X thing instead, that it wouldn't affect all the other things in your life, So you can't just pick and choose, right? It's not a buffet where
Right. How willing would you be really to like take out all of those things that are in your life?
Yeah.
Worked this way,
Yeah, I talk about that too in the book. I quote, there are some philosophers that I found really useful in thinking about that and this idea. And you see it in, it's like the butterfly effect. You see it in popular movies, someone time travels back, right? And they want to relive this one moment, do something differently, and then everything else gets impacted. And I really do think there is a kind of philosophical truth to that, because you'd have to think about being willing to trade kind of the whole of your experience for this one thing that you wanted. Could you say to yourself, like, I'd be willing to give up this person I would have never met if I never went right in the road, or whatever else it is, I mean, I think that for me, when I have those what if moments, I try to look at my life as a whole, as opposed to a moment, because it really is it's a collection of decisions. That's what's helpful for me.
Yeah, that's so valuable. And it's like a life's work, right? Like you
Yeah, absolutely. It never ends.
Yeah, well, and like a big theme in your book throughout is navigating the path, like of dealing with, the difference between who you thought you'd be and who you are, between what you wanted and what you got, and this idea that we have many possible selves, and we also have our past selves, which is something that I think about a lot, right? And I think about past Carrie and future Carrie, and like all the different versions of that. From my point of view, the 30s are a time where that gap can feel just so acute, and asked to be reckoned with, in part because we do have a sense of, it feels like time to get maybe decisive and intentional about certain things. And we still kind of, in some cases, can feel like there's a foot in various different paths, and the sense that like we're grown up, we take stock and we remember like who we were, we look ahead, we might feel intense pressure to figure out, and close that gap, and still that looming potential. And so, this idea of like this fantasy of your past self as a way to kind of, you talk about it as like a way to escape to the past, which is like this, to the like projected future from the past, right?
Yeah.
Not really even just the past. It's like what past you thought would be. It's a way to escape from like the sort of doubt and insecurity of the present, which we never escape, right? Like if you're in a life, got the good and the bad.
We're like squirming. I use like I really, if you read Pema Chodron, the Buddhist, so I find her work just immensely helpful. I read her books all the time, but I think she uses that verb, like it makes us squirm, like the discomfort, right, of that, being in the present without those stories about the past and the future. It's uncomfortable. But it is a story, and it is a distraction. And it's not that it's not an interesting way to self-reflect, I think, but like anything we're talking about, if you live too long in your past or your future, you are obviously missing out, right? You're missing out on the power of the present.
And it can be a way to protect from the power of the present, right? That feeling of like, oh, I'm going to have some very uncomfortable feelings and realities that I might need to actually deal with that actually are here. So I'm curious about your relationship with potential now. It's in the title of your book. It's haunted you like a ghost through your life. And like, is what if I had ... does it still feel to you like a sign that that we failed to reach our potential? Do you still believe in the idea of living up to your potential?
Yeah, I'm really on like a one woman mission to get people to work with the original definition of potential again, because it is, because you've read the book, so it means possibility, right? But we've turned it into a word that means promise. So this idea that someone is going to live up to a certain kind of expectation. But that's not what the actual the actual word means. So that was really freeing for me, the shift from promise to possibility, this idea of you're not really owed anything in in recognition of your work or how hard you work or what you put out in the world. I mean, you're responsible for the work that you do, and you really don't control a lot more than that. And living up to your potential, I think I've realized in the writing of the book, and I've certainly realized it, even more in the years after, and we're all as a country right now reckoning with concepts of privilege, and living up to your potential there are so many, like, it's like a spider web of different influences on how we quote unquote live up to our potential. It's dependent on things like luck and socioeconomics and gender and race. And, they've truly done studies on all of the above, to try to tease out exactly what, it means to be successful in any given endeavor. So, it's an oversimplified idea, this idea of living up to your potential. And I think
kind of like another way of saying art monster in a way, not in the sense not in the sense of like all of the things that go with that trope, but like just this idea of it is more story.
Yeah.
Of like, it's this like this thing we're supposed to always be reaching for, but even what it like the boundaries of that thing are influenced by so many different formative pieces or access to certain privileges or just
and what is even like the horizon, like what does it look like to reach your potential? I mean, it's a moving goalpost, right? I mean, I think in some ways it's part of this eternal project of self-improvement that we're also supposed to buy into, right, in our capitalist culture, right, where people make a lot of money on us, telling them how to be, people make money off telling us how to be better versions of ourselves, right? And
extraordinary, right? Like you deal with that in the book too, like about we're supposed to be extraordinary. And I love what you said about, after going through this project of this book, I'm not convinced the outliers are where we should be looking for our role models, and this idea of reconciling with ordinariness. And I'm curious, like, what do you think, like, what is that about? Like, what's so bad about being ordinary? Like, do you think it's important for us to embrace ordinariness? How do we do that? Like, what are we really wanting when we're trying to be extraordinary?
I do think it's important. I think it's very grounding, it's grounding you like as a human, connected to all other humans, when you can acknowledge that. And I really think it's like one of the keys to community and empathy. We have such an individualistic culture, as opposed to a community-based culture in a lot of ways. And we have this idea of this like pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. I did it alone. It's like it's this culture of I, and even extraordinariness is never just up one person, right? I mean, it is always a collaboration. All acts of genius are a collaboration. And all you have to do again is sort of look back at male artists and the women who supported them, right, in their lives. There are many, many, many examples of this, and there are partnerships that now in the current era, like, work the other way around, right? And women will talk about the way their partner. I'm thinking of just writers right now, but I'm sure this is true of all the arts. That the way that partners support that endeavor. There are editors involved. There are all sorts of there are all sorts of people involved in that. So I think that the idea of extraordinary, it's not that you shouldn't strive, to be really proficient and an expert in what you do, and to do it well. But the extraordinary thing seems tied into a kind of, special, I'm unique, way to sort of maybe excuse like imbalance in your life, and, you know, or excuse kind of, doing whatever it takes to get what you want. You know, I just don't know if it's that useful a concept really when it comes to what should motivate you. I guess it seems like an external, and it also is an external label, right? Like so much of what we think about when we think about success. I mean, who decides if you're extraordinary, right? Other people. You know, you don't have much control over it, so I don't know how useful it is to worry about it.
It's so subjective. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so subjective, and art is subjective. You know, I mean, if you're going to be someone who's artistic, you know, you, I think, have to realize that at some point, you just don't have control over what people make of what you do, what you put out in the world. And it sounds overly simplistic to just focus on process and not outcome. And it's really difficult. And I don't think it's possible all the time. And I do think that validation matters in terms of endurance. You know, it matters to our self-esteem. It matters to us to be praised, to get good feedback. But everyone has to have their own calculation of how much it matters, you know?
And it's okay to want that. And it's okay to need that. I have so many people talk to me with almost guilt about like, I know I shouldn't need that. I know I shouldn't need recognition. I know I shouldn't want that. I know I should just know it in myself. And like, how realistic is that, do you think?
No, it's not. It's disingenuous, I think, to say to people that, you know, that they work hard forever on something where they're getting no, you know, if they want feedback. Some people, I mean, again, I'm just taking writers because I am one, you know, some people write and they truly don't want to be, they don't care if they're ever read, right? Or published, or they're private writers, you know? But if you're someone who wants to make some sort of living at the arts, if you're someone who wants your work to be seen, and I'm so sorry, I thought I had turned off alerts, but you've probably heard that. But you know, it's okay to want that recognition. I think it's, again, just, it's in figuring out your personal, like, how much do you need and from whom, you know, and what do you need to keep going? What for you is the moment when you want to stop, not because you're not getting that recognition necessarily, but because it becomes too much, it's too much suffering, you know? Like, I think that there's a really personal calculation there. And we do, again, ourselves, I mean, use the word disservice by thinking there's some sort of formula, you know, for we have to get X thing to be successful, or this number of books sold, or this award, or whatever it is. But we probably all do need some validation, you know?
Well, and I mean, that's actually a great segue to something else that I really want to talk about. Like, because we can, if we do everything right, and if we follow all the steps, we might be successful at building somebody else's successful life, right? We might build a life that was really great for somebody else. And you know what, Rachel, like, realistically, you could have been successful at building the life that, like, kid, you thought that you were going to have, and it wouldn't have matched necessarily like your actual personality and like what you wanted. You talk about that in the book of like, it wasn't that you couldn't even, I mean, your body might beg to differ, right? Your body was like,
I don't think I could have. You said before, you know, you were extraordinarily talented, and I don't even know that that's true, really. I mean, I think I was very, very, very good. I do know that this book 100% to me solved the mystery of if I could have made it as a symphony musician, you know, which was in my head as sort of what I would do. I do not think I had the disposition for those auditions, for that.
Well, and that's the piece, right? It's like when you talk about like not having the disposition for this, like, talent is one factor, right, in a life, and there are other things that matter, like our values, our, you know, what relationship we have with money, and like how we want money to function in our lives, like our personalities, our lifestyles, our risk tolerance, our, you know, you have people in the book who it's so important to them to get to like see what they have made, like actually get made, and others who like just the process of creating is good. So, and you know, something I see a lot is it's really common for 30-somethings to increasingly value money and stability, security and predictability, and they almost feel like they're selling out on themselves because they're like, they didn't used to think that they cared about that. And you talk about, and I think you might be quoting somebody else in the book, like about finding ways of making your needs compatible with living in the world. And I thought that was really powerful, that, you know, we're building a life, right? And as you said, like, your disposition was not on board with that life. So like, what advice do you have for people who identify as artists, or maybe even, I'm just thinking sort of more broadly, like have a passion or a drive towards something that they might want to do with their lives, but they want more money, structure, stability, security, predictability. They perceive that they can't get that if they follow that passion, or, you know, make a living for making art. Like, what advice would you have for people?
Good for you for figuring that out. You know, I had to figure that out for sure. And I definitely had this idea that if I wasn't, you know, a writer full time, if I wasn't kind of a starving artist, you know, no matter what, then I wasn't a real writer. But I did, for myself, realize I needed more financial stability. For me, the psychic trade-off of getting a day job for part of the week and having health insurance and having a steady paycheck was really liberating for my art. You know, I know that we see it as a kind of giving up or selling out, and that's like so many things we're talking about. You know, I think it's a story, and you know, most artists have had to have a way of making an income. You know, we don't have private patrons, right? You know, supporting us, and most of the artists we don't talk. We're starting to talk more and more, frankly, about the fact that many of the artists who you see, you sort of assume are just making a living from their art, have partners with day jobs, right? With steady incomes. That's a real thing, you know?
Invisible resources, right? That we don't see when we're witnessing them. Yeah.
I once in my late 20s, when I was struggling with all this stuff, I interviewed, you know, like my 5 favorite travel writers that were sort of in my community, or people I knew and who I thought of as, you know, wildly successful. All 5 of them had side gigs. All 5. Like, I had thought these are, you know, these are big name people. It was really illuminating for me. And I do think you should see those day jobs, those things that help you figure out, you know, how to have more financial and other stability. They are benefiting your art. And yeah, there's always a tension with time, right? And I get that. I feel that all the time. I feel that so much during the pandemic, where I have very little childcare, you know, and very little time to write. And I know that there is a part of me that, you know, yeah, like daydreams about what if I only had to write, if that was the only thing on my plate, you know, for the day. But I don't pine for it, you know, because I know that I'm providing for my child. I'm, you know, keeping myself sane by, you know, not having to scramble constantly. I didn't like being a full-time freelance writer. I only figured that out by going through it. It was a learning moment for sure. And I had a lot of feelings about taking a day job, but it's the best thing I ever did. You know, I mean, I have no regrets about that. And it's just, again, these outside voices, you know, telling us what our lives should look like. And also, you take a job for stability or money, both. You know, nothing's permanent, right? I mean, there's no reason to say that you're going to be doing that for the rest of your life. You just have to take it day by day, and you have to figure out how to carve out the time you need in a day. I mean, psychically need. I don't mean like need for income. You know, if you take another job, I think you have to find the space that you need for your creativity. And that too is something that takes time and structure and discipline. And it's not always possible, you know, but our creativity is always there for us. You know, you're not losing it. This isn't, luckily being an artist isn't like being an athlete, you know, we're not on a clock. So there's
Yeah. And I remember one of the people that you profile says that like creativity isn't something you lose.
yeah.
So powerful. Like it's this innate part of you. Well, so like, yeah, as you talk about this, I'm thinking about this idea that success is something, first of all, that's deeply personal, that needs to account for like all of these different things we've been talking about, like who you are, what your disposition is, all of that. And
Yeah.
also it's something that may need to be renegotiated throughout your life. That you don't like figure it out once, and
Right.
that, you know, it can, and that if you decide at some point in your life, like, this is no longer what success feels like for me, like, I'm thinking about the successes that like kid you had,
Yeah.
those still are successes, like they still in that universe, like they still stand.
Yeah.
And like, you know, it's so much about, you got to figure out what matters to you most, and sometimes I don't like this might be a valid enough reason to go another way. Like we don't give ourselves permission
Sure.
to just be like,
We are
I
not
don't
required to
like being a
suffer, you
full-time
know?
writer, that I don't like it.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not-
And for me, I also realized I get to do more. What I didn't like about, I mean, forget the financial instability, which was horrible for my type of personality. And also I wanted to live in New York, and I knew I had made that choice. And so we're making all these choices, right? Like I could have gone out and lived in the middle of Kansas, right? But I didn't. I wanted to live in New York. I still feel, despite the current moment we're in, that New York will come back in this, in this way that will feed my creative soul, as it always had, always has in the past. And I wanted to live here. My friends were here. My network was here. It cost money to live here. So you're making these calculations all the time. And I think for sure, this doesn't make me happy is completely a valid reason. It's so funny that we even have to give people, ourselves and other people, permission for that, right? It's so
Yeah.
interesting. It's such an American thing, I think.
And like, yeah, happiness is something that you should feel at all times. And if you don't, you find a way to feel it. But then if there are ways that you clearly could create more of it, you're betraying whatever idea of persistence that you're supposed to follow. So
Yeah.
basically we're screwed, right?
We are. That's why we need to block out all the voices and, really like dig deep internally. And I think that, some of the reason we don't dig deep is because we don't always want to know the answers, of what would actually make us happy, because then you do have to reckon with like, oh, I am a person who needs more stability than my romanticized image of myself. It's not just our romanticized images of our lives. It's who we think we are as people, like deep down. So it's tough. It's uncomfortable, I think, sometimes figuring that out.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes being willing to listen to what yourself has to say, if you let that intuition kick in. I mean, intuition I think it's one of our superpowers, but it can be extremely inconvenient, know, like in the sense of like, sometimes the answer, it means, oh, I need to break my own heart in some way. I need to let go of something that, I think in very few situations do we choose to leave something when it is 0% fulfilling anymore, right? Like there's always certain things that we appreciate. So we've talked about, sometimes you need to quit. You need to make a decision to. What are some ways that you think people can tell the difference between the type of fear and resistance that's just going to be part of any kind of growth or any kind of, I'm sure there's moments as a writer where you're like, I just want to stop, or I hit the resistance or whatever. And the intuition or knowing that something's not actually right for you and choosing to quit and pursue another path.
How do you know when the right time is to quit? When you're suffering too much. I mean, I think we've talked about that cultivating of intuition. And I do think that the more we work on that, and it's something I've been thinking about more and more, because I do feel like all the time I've spent online during the pandemic, in those early months, especially New York, were so scary. I mean, they're so scary everywhere, but I'm in New York, so that's the experience I had of just being constantly like on our phones checking and, not being able to see anyone. So connecting through our phones and reading the news, constantly reading the news, doom scrolling and all of that stuff. And I've really in the past few months been trying to cut more and more of that out, not the communicating with my friends, but the kind of the social media stuff, the constant news scrolling, because it's crowding my brain with other voices. And I do feel as though what intuition requires is space, like brain space, time to self-reflect and sort of the few trusted voices, in your life, collaboration with those people, but not collaboration with online lists of what we should be doing or how to be productive or how to optimize all our time 24/7 because we're robots, or how to be successful. And that stuff is not written by people who know us, and know who we are. And so I guess I'm thinking about how what's been useful to me in moments, those crossroad moments, is deep reflection and talking to the people that are close to me in my circle, and really like checking in with myself about where I am on the misery scale. I mean, I don't think it's always easy to know when to quit. I don't think there's any, you can get it wrong, right? In both directions. Like you can go on too long and you can quit too early. And that's sort of, it is what it is. And I suppose if you quit too early, you often have the opportunity to come back to something before it's too late. And if you quit too late, well then, okay, you've lost a little time and now you're moving on, and that is what it is too. But it's practice. I think it's practice, checking in with yourself and reflecting on those changing ideas of, who you want to be and what you want your life to look like. I wish I had a formula, but you can see I'm against formulas, so I don't have one.
We could always try. We could always hope that somebody outside of ourselves has the answer, right? We could always go for it. Yeah.
With that, it hasn't worked for me, but it has worked for me to talk to people who know me, and to check in with people who I know are both going to be honest with me and empathetic with me,
Yeah. And, getting to just like witness your process as a removed reader, right? Like as someone who didn't actually witness you, but like part of what it seems like there's like one of the keys there is the willingness to ultimately like value your own felt experience, listen to it, and like trust yourself. Just like be like, hey, I am an authority on my own experience. And I see like in the book, you did that when you quit. And then you got to talk to all of your very wise, wonderful, creative, fellow interlochen grads, right? Or I don't know if grads is the right word, alum. And they helped you see how they had trusted themselves. And like, you were able to do that. Yeah. Does that resonate for you with what you experienced?
Yeah, I think I'm a seeker, in those kinds of moments in terms of wanting to talk to other people. And so, both the books I've written have been about deep relationships with other people, and sort of the wisdom that I've gleaned from those relationships. So I am someone who's prone, to looking for that kind of help and for those kinds of answers. But it does only get you so far. There's a balance there, I think, with, again, even though you're getting really thoughtful kind of insights from people, they're not living your life either. So you do have to, it is a reckoning, like you are the only one who can figure that out. And
Yeah.
that's maybe not a comforting answer,
Well,
I hope it is.
In my view anyway. Like this is something I really hold true in like all my work with my clients or with anyone I'm trying to help. And like certainly when I'm on the other side of it with myself, is that like it's normal to want somebody else to have the answer. And nobody can, like nobody but you can. And part of what I'm hearing you say is like it is in relationship that we can often find ourselves. Like in relationship, we can have that mirror, or we can have that like alternative perspective that we can kind of like bounce our own intuition off of.
Yeah,
And
you're talking it through.
What's that?
Right? You're talking it through, right? You're sort of figuring it out in dialogue. And that for me has always been really useful. But yeah, ultimately you're the one, looking in the mirror every day. So
yeah, very inconvenient. Well, I was hoping that we would solve all the world's problems.
I know, I'm sorry.
Sorry, folks. You still have to do it.
Yeah.
So speaking of like some of the trade-offs or some of the things, the hard decisions about like how am I going to find my own balance? I know something a lot of 30-somethings deal with is the decision about children.
Yeah.
And maybe particularly creatives, I'm not even sure that's true, right? But there is this, if you're already in a field where you an artistic field where you have concerns about choosing that for financial reasons or for structure, stability, and time, and creativity can be a bit of a monster itself, right? You can't just be like, great, I will have my breakthrough between 3 p.m. and 4 p.m. right? So you did choose to have a child, and I'm curious about if you could talk just a little bit about how you navigated that in light of also being a writer who never feels you have as much time as you'd like to write.
Yeah, I struggled a lot when I was pregnant and in the first year or two of having a child with fears about creative loss. It was a difficult transition for me. And now I do look back and think, wow, I really suffered with that, those fears again. And, I was writing this book before I got pregnant. And so I had this whole reckoning of writing the book. And then I had an entirely new reckoning of being a parent. And I will say, being a parent clarified even further for me. A lot of these ideas, these misconceptions about being an artist, this idea that you can't, combine your personal life with your professional life in any way that's going to make you happy. You'll always feel you're lacking in one or the other. It really did give me a newfound, it was an explosion, for me, of my personal identity, my creative identity, having a kid. It was really like, I think for many women it is. I'm sure for both men and women, but I think women in particular, because we go through such an incredible physical change on top of the psychological change, and especially in the early years, our body is often the body that's sort of still attached to the child, for breastfeeding. Just a lot of layers to it that are really fascinating to me. And it's sort of, this is not my analogy, but I'd read somewhere, it's like, a bomb goes off and then the shrapnel is like all the pieces of your personal and professional life, like everything's sort of lying around you and you have to kind of figure out what you're going to put back again. Sometimes it all goes back, sometimes none of it goes back. It's usually some combination of your identity gets, put back together, integrating the new identity you have as a parent. It's a long answer. And I'm so happy that I have this child in my life, and I had to have that reckoning. I really think it's made me, although you don't have to have a child to go through this, but I think it's made me more connected to the world having a child. In a way that I was compartmentalizing a lot before. I'm more integrated, I think, as a person now. I think my art has benefited from having a child in terms of the presence I have, the way I'm forced into the present as a parent. Yes, there's a cost. The cost is time, that's a no-brainer. Yeah, you don't have the time that you used to have. And I guess for me, I'm so happy, being a parent to this child, and that the idea, and I know it's a time limited thing in terms of how he needs me right now. He's 5, he needs me in a very specific way for a certain period of time. And for me, I love that I'm giving that time to him now. I know that it has cost me professionally. Of course, that just to be honest, um, that's okay with me, and I think everyone gets there in a different way into that either acceptance or non-acceptance. Everyone is kind of figuring that out, and artists and non-artists too. My friends who have different kinds of jobs, they again, especially the women, have struggled, and you see your friends surprise you in terms of who's racing to get back to work and who was like this super ambitious career person who decides to stay home. I mean, everyone is kind of making their own calculations there as well, but I think that what I wish I could let go of, what I wish I could have told my former self is not to have so much fear about how everything will shake out, and to know that there's sort of a season for everything. And for me, during this pandemic has been another reckoning, right? I mean, I thought I didn't have time to write before. Well, like, look what the universe has just dropped in here. You just have to be easy on yourself, and again, like, artists are not athletes. Like, I'm not going to be out of shape, from not getting to write for 6 hours a day, from getting to write for half an hour a day. I do find that your time management skills get incredibly good when you're a parent. You cannot wait for the muse to strike, at any moment. You do work regular hours. I found that
tell the muse, like, hey, this is when I'm available, show
yeah.
up.
Yeah, I think that it's a really, it makes you disciplined in new ways that I've also found, yes, frustrating time-wise, but very useful art-wise. I'm more efficient. I always saw being a writer, I always saw any art as a job just like any other job. I never felt, I never romanticized this idea of that is one thing of waiting around for the muse. I never did that. I always, put in the work. But I wasted a lot more time before I was a parent on other stuff. And there's no more time. There's no time to waste anymore. So that's been very clarifying.
Yeah, well, and I so appreciate your perspective on that. And I can imagine people sort of like hungrily soaking it up, because this is something so many people wrestle with. And of course, the truth is, like, once you're actually experiencing it, it's different for everybody. And again, it comes back to like figuring out what your right balance is now that you're in this modified set of circumstances and this different identity. And it's like one more of those things where, oh, if past you had been able to like know, hey, this is gonna feel good, like you would have had to suffer less.
Yes, I would have had to suffer less.
Mm-hmm.
And my gosh, like, I can't imagine my life without my child. Obviously now I can't even picture that other what if reality at this point. I'm sure I would have been fine. I'm sure I would have been happy, but the joy, of parenting for me, has been just like such an unexpected gift. I thought I would struggle a lot longer. I thought I would really torture myself about it. About the ways that it sort of impacted my professional life, and I really have leaned into to not doing that. And also, I do think parenthood is such an opportunity. Yes, parenthood is full of monotony, and time is this weird accordion where it can really stretch and contract when you're kind of playing the same game with your kid for the 500th time. But like, my goodness, what an exercise in presence being a parent is. And creativity, to me, what this doing the research for this book taught me, that creativity is really a mindset of being present. And there is nothing like having a child to force you into the moment that you're in. You can't escape a lot of monotony, and like just sort of being there, like mentally being there with that person in a way that I'm not sure I've ever experienced before. The way that my child pulls me into the present.
Yeah. And as you're talking about this, I'm even just thinking about how when we go through a process of like reckoning with all of these ideas that can kind of hold us prisoner about like this like one perfect road, or you refer in the book to that poem that Cheryl Strayed refers to of the ship that didn't carry us, that we can never really know what that parallel would be. Our lives have this remarkable ability to continue giving us opportunities through which to do our work on this planet and to be ourselves, and like, against maybe what might have seemed like all odds before, like your life as a parent is actually feeding your artist instead of depriving it. And I'm sure there's other people who might watch and be like, that was not my experience, right? Like there's a lot of different ways it can show up. And I think that a useful nugget of gold from what you're saying for really anyone is that our circumstances, while on the face of them they may look as if they can't work with our core driver, like there may be surprising ways in which they can, right? In which that actually we can be served by choosing to trust that what is right in front of us is what we need in order to take the next step or make the next choice. It's pretty powerful. So I am curious, just for the people out there who do consider themselves artists, and in the book you talk to such a bunch of former classmates who kept up creativity in their lives in one way or another, some of them very centrally in their careers and some of them less so. But from that diversity of ways that you found your classmates grew up and built lives, can you share some of your insights about the ways, like all the ways a person can live a creative or artistic life?
Yeah, I think that idea of many paths is obviously central to the book, and the people in the book have veered in all sorts of interesting ways. And for one person, the kind of what he saw as the compromise of his day job was actually the thing that allowed him to get more of the art that he was working on in that collaborative setting with other people, but to like see it come to fruition versus when he was working alone. He was writing screenplays alone and then went to work for a special effects company when the work that they were doing together as a team was ended up being more fulfilling than his own individual work. And that's that's a really unexpected lesson. I think it would be for a lot of us, that somehow the collaboration that we're part of becomes more primary to us than our individual, my own vision, right? There are people in the book who, there's one person who's veered completely away from the arts, and she kind of sees creativity as a mindset, I would say, like a sort of practice that means that she's absorbed, she's in the flow of something she's doing. So whether that be art classes that she's taking, or she's picking out a book for a friend that she thinks they would like to read, or picking out her outfit, like all these little moments where there's opportunity for creativity and curiosity. She sees those moments, I think, is really fulfilling. Someone else in the book talks about how he's focused on process over outcome, and how that's the way he's kind of reconciled his creative ambitions with whatever happens to his creative work. And so I put in the hours. It's not my job to think about how talented I am compared to other people. I do what I do, and then it's out of my hands. Another person talks about it kind of being her destiny to move away from music. She was a musician into her 20s, and to move into teaching, and how, that she couldn't have become the kind of teacher she is now without that earlier path. Mm-hmm. So, I think that the key is flexibility. I mean, you have to do the work. You want to be passionate about what you're doing. But I think what keeps us, real resilience is flexibility, or at least part of resilience is it's not just perseverance. It is being flexible about, what we're doing and where we're headed.
And like, I'm thinking about people who are really on the other side of this, like before going through the kind of reckoning that you went through, and just feeling super hard on themselves. It's like permission to create a life that honors your creativity that you actually like, right?
Yeah.
Like you're allowed to want to like your life. You're allowed to.
Like you should want to like.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's Jenna who says like what you have to do to be an artist is produce art.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and then there are a lot of ways that you can do that. So I'm wondering, you've been so generous with your time. I feel like I could talk to you for years. But what, what last advice or maybe words of encouragement or suggestions do you have for someone out there who's dealing with 30-something panic, is like freaking out, like I need to figure this out. Maybe they feel like they've lost their creative, artistic, part of themselves in their lives, and they're freaking out about that. Maybe they're just like trying to figure out like how do I deal with this? What tips do you have for somebody who's really reckoning with this? Is there anything concrete you'd say would be a good start to this reckoning?
Yeah, I think again, this idea that you don't really lose your creative self. It's not like you can't misplace it, you don't have to be creative 24/7. I mean, no one is all the time to be a creative person. It's you can, of course, if you're going to try to make your living creatively, you have to put in the hours consistently, but we're not all trying to make our living that way. We can pick it up and put it down again and pick it up and go sort of through cycles there. So I think just that acknowledgement is hopefully comforting. And if it's someone who's finding they don't feel like they have the space for creativity, they want to be creative right now, but they don't have the space for it. I mean, I guess a really concrete tip there, and I'm doing this with myself, constantly, is really examining where your time is going. And if what you're doing is with your time, that's your free time, is fulfilling and nourishing you creatively, and if not, to kind of make adjustments there. And I think that we don't have to give over hours and hours of our day. I really just lowering the bar to like 15 minutes at the start of the day to do something that feels good creatively is a great place to start. I think that change builds on change, and so once you find some of that space, more of it is made usually. I don't know if that's very helpful, but that's what I've got.
It's very helpful. And Rachel, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you for talking to us. Thank you for this book. It is phenomenal. I cannot recommend it highly enough. And you do not need to be consider yourself an artist or consider yourself a creative to really find some good support and ideas in this book to help you navigate through your 30-something panic. So thank you for talking to us. And I'm really excited to see where your creative road takes you. I will be paying attention. You talk in the book about like that idea you had as a writer of like, is there someone waiting for my next thing that I write? And I can say like, yes, I am.
Oh, I'm so glad.
I'm waiting. I'm ready. So thanks for talking with us.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.